Hello everyone, and welcome here to Mission Top. My name is Gary Nuila, and this is a live stream that is part of an ongoing series that is exploring and seeking to understand manhood. As part of the series, we've been developing a definition of manhood that tries to capture all of its essential features, which I'll lead off with today. And that is that manhood is the earned status that society awards males for bearing the public responsibility of producing the resources that society needs that are not naturally likely to be produced, most commonly by being a provider, a procreator, and a protector, but adaptable to the needs of society. So that's what we've come to thus far, and this is a work in progress. This is something that I like to do. I even do with my family as far as our family mission. We have a mission that we read every week and go over, and as we were exploring in the last video that focused on American pragmatism, we consider all these things an ongoing understanding, always seeking to better our understanding, better our definitions, you could say. So as we've gone on, this definition has already changed, and we're looking to better it as we go along. I think it still needs to be a little more elegant, but I think we are doing a good job of capturing the essential nature of manhood, which, as opposed to a lot of ways in which I see manhood, sorry, it looks like I had my microphone down, as a lot of ways that I see manhood defined for a lot of people. This definition focuses or sees the inherently focused outward nature of manhood, rather than being something about the personal satisfaction of the individual. We have been trying to attach a symbol to manhood in this series, and the best symbol we've been able to come up with thus far is the oak tree. And that is because an oak tree can be seen as a pillar of stability, because manhood has everything to do with being a pillar of the community, and those that are men are the pillars of the community. The oak tree provides both protection and resources at the same time, and it offers up a fruit, a seed, if you will, for new life that can perpetuate itself. So it captures a lot of the essential nature of manhood. And today we are going to be focusing on this providing nature of manhood. That is something that you will find in every conception of manhood across societies and across time. It is nearly universal. And I'm excited to talk about it today because this conception of manhood is also perennially relevant. It is one that has not become unuseful, I guess you could say, in the slightest. And so the more we can understand why this is tied up with manhood and how to embody it, the more we can kind of revive manhood today in our conception of it, because the world needs this aspect of manhood more than ever, I think. And it's funny how our society has taken steps to discourage this aspect of manhood, which is only beneficial for society, as you'll see today. And the best way to explain this concept of the big man, the provider par excellence, I guess you could say, that is this trait of manhood, is to start with this image that I used for the thumbnail of this video. And that is to use the character of George Bailey from the movie It's a Wonderful Life. I'm assuming nearly everybody has seen this movie. Hopefully you have. And sometimes we treat this as a Christmas movie. I mean, obviously we treat it as a Christmas movie. It's always played around Christmas. But if you really look at the movie, it's funny because it only has a very little to do with Christmas itself. I mean, I can understand why we bring it into Christmas. But if you just look at the movie with fresh eyes, you'll see that there's a lot of different ways you can frame this movie. It's a pretty complex movie. It's dark in a lot of ways if you look at it with fresh eyes. But one way of framing this movie is to say that it's answering the question, right? Who's the biggest man in town? And this movie is also just bound up with concepts of masculinity and manhood. So from some of the very earliest scenes, you have first this kind of dichotomy placed up there between George Bailey's dad and Potter. So these are kind of the two versions of manhood that were being placed before us. And you even see little George Bailey defending his dad to Potter, that his dad is the biggest man in town, even though, of course, Potter would claim this title of being the biggest man of town because he's the wealthiest, he's the most powerful, right? And you see that throughout the movie, there's this play even off of, who actually is the biggest man in town. And you can even see George gets affected by it, right, throughout his life, where he realizes at a certain point, at his lowest point, that Potter, holds all this power, has everything, and he hasn't accomplished anything that he actually wanted to in his life. But then, of course, you have the resolution. You have this thing where he goes in and sees George Bailey's actual effect on this community. And what you come out with is seeing that the path that George Bailey took actually made him the biggest man in town, right? And you get this at the end. You even have Harry Bailey, George Bailey's brother, who's the war hero, who's also tied up with this conception of manhood that we often think that manhood's tied up with those martial virtues of being a defender and fighting in war. And George didn't get to do that, right? You could see that was part of his sense of failure as a man. And it's Harry Bailey that declares, that George is the richest man in town at the end of that movie. So by the end of the movie, the answer is obvious. Who's the biggest man in town? Of course, it's George Bailey. And what is it that made him the biggest man in town? It's, of course, that his entire focus of his life was in creating resources and then distributing them and directing them outward towards the community. Whereas Potter was even more successful, you could say, at producing the resources. He had more. He was richer monetarily, right? But those resources were not directed back out towards the good of the community. And so, Potter, of course, ends up spending Christmas alone or with his cronies and henchmen and stuff. So, I see this as a real powerful example to kind of just get us understanding what this aspect of manhood is all about. And there's other good popular cultural examples. As I was putting these together, I realized that I mostly took them from a little bit older movies, well, definitely older movies, and that's because I think we had a better grasp of this type of character in the past. But there are some of these in more modern films. You just have to look around in order to find them. And so some of the examples that come to mind is, Robin Hood is the perfect example of this, where he is acquiring resources, even through theft, because he's in an upside down world where the king is gone and you have a tyrant there. So he has to actually be, a character kind of like Batman or something that some would even see as bad. But of course, he acquires these resources just to distribute them back out, and that's why he ends up the big man in the story. You have Rick from Casablanca. I think is kind of a nice, subtle big man, you could say, because he clearly has this influence and resources in this, little kind of corner of the world during World War II. And on the surface, he looks like he's a kind of Potter character, right? But when push comes to shove, you learn that beneath the surface, he's actually very much a big man. And this is best seen in that scene where there's this couple that, unless they're able to get away immediately, I think they're going to be captured by the police or something. In effect, they need money, and so Rick encourages them to the husband, to gamble, to try out his luck, at the gambling table, and rigs things up so that they do get the money that they need so that they can escape. And you see everybody in the setting there in the bar, all of Rick's employees. You can see that this is what they honor in him. This is why they see him as such an exceptional character. You see this in High Noon. And I used High Noon as an example because in High Noon, it's not a matter of monetary resources. that is given. But in this case, it has to do with protection. But more than that, it's the sheriff of this town in High Noon. And he is, you can just see, he is the big man in town. He's the one that provides these resources of both social cohesion, protection, and a number of other things. So that's a great example. Mr. Deeds goes to town. This is one with again the same character, Gary Cooper. This is not the Adam Sandler Mr. Deeds goes to town, but this is another one where a man acquires wealth, and in the end, what he does, boom, is distribute it to others. To Kill a Mockingbird has Atticus Finch, another great character. You can just feel the community honors this man because of what he gives out to the community, and in subtle and obvious ways, both through resources and ideas. He's a lawyer, and what he does in that community, you can see he is a big man in that community. And then I put in the example of The Godfather, because as with most things in manhood, you see that manhood is not about being a good man per se, a moral man. That's not really what it's about. It's about being good at being a man. And so these things of manhood is, provisioning resources for the community. And then The Godfather, certainly kind of that Godfather figure, does that for his community. Of course, he does it through immoral means, but he is nonetheless honored as a big man in that setting. So I just wanted you to see that this doesn't depend on a sort of moral goodness in order to operate and still qualify people as men in their communities. And that's important to see. So moving along to out of the fictional realm and into more the cultural realm, kind of taking a bit of a tour around the world, I guess you could say, you find this very same thing. And again, I think this is maybe the most ubiquitous notion of manhood that's out there that I've found. And I want to stress that because I think that in our minds today, so often it's that warrior part of manhood that gets stressed, and that's a lot that a lot of men are most attracted to, is being a fighter and a warrior and a defender. And that's important and definitely is part of manhood, but there's a reason that I'm leaving that to the end, and that's because, if you haven't noticed, that's not as important right now at this moment in history. Not to say that any guy shouldn't be prepared for that, because as we know, things can fall apart in an instant, and then suddenly that would become very relevant again. But what I very much want you to see is that this attribute of manhood is just as much tied up with being a man. And so this is something that every man can do right now, today. And if he would do so and strive in this, I really think it would resurrect much more of a respect for the male role in society that can be fulfilled and achieve that status of manhood. Okay, so let's start off in Andalusia in Spain, one of my favorite places in the world. Was able to spend a few years, lived there as a child in Madrid, but certainly took a lot of trips to Andalusia. And then back in 2019, when my family was spending a year traveling, we spent some time there in Granada in Andalusia. And there is very much a culture of manhood, a macho culture, as you could say. And even that word macho kind of has grown to have a negative connotation to it. But if you look at what this has been in these societies, you inevitably find, again, that always the real respected macho kind of manhood was always directed back out towards the society. So in Andalusia, your reputation as a man depends upon your duty to provide for your dependents. It depends on your ability to achieve personal autonomy. And that's something I haven't brought up yet today. But yeah, this personal autonomy of not being under others, a freedom from dependence. It has to do with sacrifice and service of the family. That even if your option is menial work, and even if you have to do that under, a boss or an overlord, well, you still do it anyway because of that duty to serve the family. And so, it is recognized that dependence on other men is sometimes a necessary evil, you could say, but dependence on a woman is far worse in this society and nearly every society as far as manhood goes. And you could read this as an antagonism towards women, or you could read this the other way, as being pro-woman, that women have better things to be doing in society and have throughout the history of the world than taking care of men who could take care of themselves. When you see it that way, I hope you see that that notion is not anti-woman, it's very pro-woman. To be dependent on a woman is to revert back to that initial state of being a child, of being a little boy. And we've gone over in other episodes of why that is so crucial to sever and avoid as far as kind of the male psyche and his tendency to regress into the security of womanhood. So in Andalusia, a real man must be out of doors, facing others, staring them down, facing the world. So this is very much a public endeavor. It's not enough to acquire resources and do things with them in secret or behind closed doors. You need to do these things. You need to face the world, be out there with your resources, be out there associating with men to qualify to be a big man. And it's very much looked down upon if you are stingy with your money, your time, and your resources, right? So there's an example given, I'm pulling a lot of these examples from a book that I've been using throughout this series, Manhood in the Making, Cultural Concepts of Masculinity. And there's a lot of examples with all these big men of the opposite of the big men. The big men that are kind of the good-for-nothing men. They're saying in Spanish, in the Andalusian culture, they're saying that they no sirve, it doesn't serve, which means like it's good for nothing, right? It has no utility. That man has no utility, no sirve. And oftentimes they're referring both to the man himself and to his manhood, his genitalia. It's good for nothing, right? That's kind of the notion of the anti-big man, right? And okay, so moving on to the Mehinaku Indians of central Brazil. So incredibly different culture. You could say no contact, mostly because these ones are more in the Amazonian rainforest. And you see the exact same thing. Notions of manhood tied up with worldly achievement. It's tied to sexual laurels because there's a lot of trading of resources for sex in this culture, which shouldn't sound too foreign in a lot of cultures, the way things actually play out. So the rich man has many lovers and many wives, hence many children, all which tie into his reputation as a man in this culture. And that's what we're going to be hitting strongly, this notion of being a procreator. We're going to hit on that in the next episode. But you have these notions of industriousness tied to manhood. The big man is the man that's up before everybody else in the morning, working on things, fishing before everybody else has even arisen. And then he's out on these dangerous expeditions to fish and to acquire protein, which in this culture is very rare. But the expectation is that when he gets back, he's not getting back in secret and he's going into his own tent and enjoying his spoils, but people will be waiting for him when he returns in the public square. He's to return with those resources to the public square and distribute them right there. One thing that you see that's common across cultures is that when these big men acquire their resources, one thing they should do is sponsor feasts and festivals. So it's not just a matter of getting the resources to people that don't have them. It's a matter of bringing people together in communion once they do acquire these resources, right? So the big man is seen as not just somebody who, treats individuals in society, but brings together society. Because something like a feast, you imagine what's happening at a feast is that you are all partaking of something. You're making yourselves into the same thing by feasting on the bounty that's in front of you. And rituals are the same thing. You'll find almost all rituals have something to do, especially kind of social rituals, with a communion, with bringing together into a common identity or purpose. And so it's the big man that provides the resources, because oftentimes rituals are expensive. They require costumes. They require people working to get them ready. They require food because food is so often tied up in ritual. And so, it's the big man that makes that all possible in these cultures. He eats with his kinsmen around him and shares his food as he's doing so, rather than doing it off in private. And so again, each of these cultures has this concept of the exact opposite, the lazy man, the effeminate man, who you never see, who's off by himself, eating by himself. Whereas the real man is both ambitious and generous. Okay, let's go to the highlands of New Guinea. That's the one that's kind of directly under my image in this one, that's where I even steal the phrase big man, because this is an actual term that they use as kind of the ambition of men, is to be a big man in the community. And then they have an opposite term, rubbish man, for the one that's not. And it's funny because so many of these cultures have different the opposite terms. They have one for the big man, and they also have one for the rubbish man. Oftentimes it's the garbage man. Oftentimes it's the man who's good for nothing, the good for nothing man. It's the schmuck. It's as I've referred to before, it's like TLC in that great song, which you've got to go listen to the lyrics. It's the scrub, So this is something that's existed in every culture. But there in New Guinea, what's expected is a blend of personal charisma in with all this and political leadership, which we haven't gotten to, in addition to the philanthropy that he is doing. It's also important that he didn't just inherit his place, but earned his place through deeds. And that's something, perhaps being as somebody that didn't inherit a lot. I mean, I inherited a good family and lots of stability in my life, but no wealth, no titles, no anything. And to see people still in the world, still today, politicians and things ride into their positions on the coattails of their forebears, always irks me a little bit, because that's not how it should be, right? It should be like these people in New Guinea have, that you are honored when you earn your place through deeds yourself, not tied to the deeds of your forebears. Again, the big man in New Guinea unifies some people around him in a community, even under forces that would pull them apart. And so a good example of how this would work is going back to It's a Wonderful Life and the story in A Wonderful Life when it's the bank run, right? So right at this very moment where there's the bank run, everybody is out there for themselves, looking to just make sure they get out of the bank run in a way that benefits them, even if others are hurt. And certainly Potter is on that path. But even when the people come to the building, the Bailey Building and Loan, and they're all wanting to withdraw their money, and George is trying to explain, look, you can't withdraw your money, because if you do, it makes the whole thing fall apart. It hurts everyone. And there's some people that want to do it anyway. But George, in that moment, pulls people together in that time of fracturing, and solves the solution, makes sure everybody takes care of, but society is preserved. So you can see how that would be an important function of the big man. He also motivates people to produce and accumulate great stores of resources. So it isn't just about him acquiring resources. He's also trying to motivate people to generate their own resources and make sure that they save their resources. That's important in this New Guinea culture. In a lot of ways, he's like a banker, right? If you think of a banker accumulating resources, but on the other hand, it's the exact opposite of a banker, because instead of accumulating resources and loaning money out, but all for personal gain, the big man is giving stuff out, with it's like the anti-interest. So again, when you consider that we allowed our society to get to the point where we kind of see investment bankers, per se, as some of the big men of our society because of their tremendous wealth, and of course it's all focused on personal gain, then you turn back to these societies and you realize these big men were the exact opposite, that were seen as the big men for, yes, acquiring all that wealth, but then solely to give it away. It's a really stark contrast and really shows you how far we've gone down this path, and why we have the problems that we do today, right? Where we have all these people with tremendous resources and we're mad at the disparity. Well, we wouldn't be so mad at the disparity, would we, if the whole value thing in society was to acquire those resources in order just to give them away. And that's why, like, for a figure like Bill Gates, even if you don't like him, you don't like kind of the things that he's gotten into, there is something of the big man in him where he acquires all this money in ways that, again, aren't to do with kind of those notions of warrior manhood and stuff, but he acquires this tremendous wealth, and then he's spending his time trying to find effective ways to distribute it. There's something very much to respect in that, and very much in the line of the big men of manhood in these different cultures. Again, you see sponsors of ceremonies and feasts, like we said before, that notion of hiding nothing, that his profits are public property. They're seen as that. But what I like about it is it's not like today also kind of a notion of socialism or communism where people's profits are public property by right of force, by right of violence, you could say, right? Because that's the way that taxation works, that's the way anything works. Government can only do what it does at the point of a gun. If you follow it through, it's always at the end of the day at a point of a gun, by force, by compulsion, right? Where these societies had this all operating, in effect, they did see the profits of the big man as public property, but not by compulsion, right? By culture, by the fact that you were expected as the big man to give them away freely and generously. So there's something very much to admire about that again, we've lost completely in the way that we try to solve every problem by way of government. And now let's move to African big men. So Africa just has a tremendous amount of tribes, so I'll just mention a couple that also have this notion of the big man. There's the Dodoth people. There's a potent example where the whole mark of manhood, of passing from boyhood to manhood, in that ritual sense, like the rite of passage that we have done a whole episode on at this point, is the point at which the boy acquires his first ox, his first fat ox, whether by theft or whether through other means, but he's acquired it, and then he's slaughtered it, and then he's distributed it to the community. And in that moment, he goes from being a boy, again, somebody that's receptive, that receives nourishment from others, to a man, somebody who provisions resources to others. And so in the book, there's this great phrase that somebody came up with, is quoting somebody that says that these big men are expected to be a veritable human cornucopia. And I really like that image of being, a man as being this human cornucopia. Then there's the Samburu tribe in Africa. We've talked about them before in that notion of, or in that episode with rites of passage. So I'm just going to read a passage because I think it just summarizes nicely all these different attributes and kind of adds some new articulations on it. The composite image of the worthy man includes a heavy emphasis on economic self-sufficiency and productivity. Material self-denial and an associated giver status are elevated to moral paramountcy. The ideal among the Samburu is that a man should aim at increasing his herd and the size of the family he founds until he can form a homestead in its own right. In other words, he is expected to reproduce the homestead, the basic kinship unit of the tribe, by the sweat of his brow, and to make it grow and prosper so that it becomes more than self-sufficient, to be fruitful and multiply, as in Jehovah's exhortation to the Israelites. A man must produce both cattle and children in equal measure, protecting them both from predators and interlopers, and he must expend his social energies in economic reinvestment rather than personal consumption that might deplete his family's precious patrimony. The Samburu man is always under public pressure to measure up in this regard, but his worthiness comes not only from accumulating, but also from lavish gifting during feasts. The donor function looms larger in Samburu male imagery than sexual valor. An institutionalized competition of tribal generosity spurs men to try to best each other in a kind of potlatching of meat. At every feast, each man tries to give the most and take the least. At most feasts, for instance, younger men would insist on giving their seniors the best pieces of meat, and affines would be treated in a similar way. Even among age mates, whose equality was beyond question, there was a continual battle of politeness in which the man who seemed to eat the least and encourage his neighbors to eat the most was the moral victor, the truly worthy man. A selfish man, an eater of his own herds, is described as la roi, a term used among the Samburu for small, paltry things, undersized or fragile objects, and for tools that do not work effectively, like a leaky water bucket or a Land Rover that keeps breaking down. The la roi man, then, is childlike, undersized, mean, deficient, wasteful, inefficient. He takes more than he gives. So that illustrates it, doesn't it? I mean, in the end, if you could summarize the big man in a sentence, it's a man that gives far more than he takes from society. One last aspect to mention is in the context of the hunt, right? Today, we oftentimes associate hunting, again, we've skewed these concepts. We look at hunting as, at least some people in society do, as this thing that's tied up with men and violence, men and killing, right? But when you realize that the hunt in these different societies had everything to do with this big man role, this role of going and doing the dangerous thing that would provide vital resources to the community, and that these men were doing it in order to benefit the community, you come to see that hunting, has been one of the most nurturing things that humanity has ever done. And yes, you could go into the histories. It seems like humans have been very good wherever they did at basically making the biggest game go extinct. We used to have a tremendous amount more of these giant big game, even bigger than our big game. And everywhere that humans have gone, they've generally gone extinct. So if that's true, if it was the humans that are cause of it, that's something to lament. But on the other side, you got to see these things for what they are, as far as what they've done for human society, and see that this is a very particular way in which men fulfill a masculine kind of nourishing role for the community. All right, so let's jump out of these cultural examples and see if we can wrap this up with some tie-in to today. What do we do with these ideas today? Why have we lost them? Why have we skewed them? Right? You can see that in these ideas, there's very much this public-facing direction of all this. Like we've said, everything is not about personal fulfillment for the man, but is directed outward to the bettering forth of society. And it's not about doing it, in the dark, in secret. So it's very interesting, because in a lot of these cultures, even if there's a man who is taking care of his family, who is, seemingly, doing his duties of providing those basic resources and things, if he's just always in his home, hanging out with his wives and his daughters in the confines of the home, if he's never out in a public square, if he's never out associating with men, he doesn't get this status. So that's a very important thing to realize about this, is that it's not enough to just stay in hunkering around our computers and enjoying our pleasures and whatnot that we do today. There's something about this that if we want to be these kinds of big men, you've got to get out, right, and sally forth into the fray, right? Kind of quoting some Don Quixote, right? You've got to have a little bit of that getting out in front of people in the light of the public and achieving in that arena, right? Or you don't qualify for this stuff. Another thing that I want to point out that may not be obvious on this is that there are several different domains of production in this notion of the big man. And the common thread, I think, between all of them is a notion of ordering chaos. To quote from the book, it says, "Manhood is seen as the conjoining of disparate elements into an ordered whole, the imposition of form upon chaos. So again, if you've been here for the last episodes, you should see tie-ins to kind of like the symbolic underpinnings of manhood as the ordering principle, femininity as or I should say masculinity as the ordering principle, and femininity as the principle of potential, the more chaotic and unknown potential. And so masculinity is this ordering of that bringing things together. Bringing together that community is one way, for example, of producing for the community, is by bringing them into an ordered whole. So political production is just as much a form of production in this than other things. But not just political, not just money, which is the obvious one, or food, which is another obvious one that we have been talking about, but how about art and craft, right? That's putting a form on disparate elements, putting a form on chaos. Music is the same thing, right? How about philosophia, what we're doing right now? Sophia, a love of wisdom. So it is very much in this light. You could be a big man by producing the ideas that bring together humanity, that offer useful ways of living and looking at life to the community. And if it's not obvious, that's one that I love. Again, Philia Sophia, it's this love of wisdom. That's what we are engaged in right now, is this. It's never a claiming of wisdom, a capturing of it. It's a love of it and a pursuit of it. And then a sharing of what one discovers about wisdom along that process. So we have philosophia. It is labor, obviously, but it's also creation of organization and enterprise. You can also see how those kind of things are a ordering of potentiality. And so that is also a very much masculine thing to do, to be an organizer and to begin new enterprises out of potential things. So whether that's a nonprofit or profit-based enterprise, that entrepreneurialism is very much tied into this, you could say. Historical figures that really hit this kind of home, at least here in the United States, ones that really just, at least in a political sense, but in a broader sense, I think really embody this big man principle here for American society. I would put with Abraham Lincoln and George Washington. These are two individuals whose lives came to be undeniably outward facing, right? These were men of ambition, undoubtedly, but the ambition was all about doing things for society, pulling disparate things together, right? And so that's why we honor them in the way that we do. And so those are figures of big men. For you, those of you that are here thinking about it, go ahead and, if you put in the chat, who comes to mind for you, whether it's a story figure, a historical figure, a personal figure, who comes off to you as the epitome of the big man to you? So, as I was saying earlier, hopefully now that we've really articulated this notion of the big man, I'm hoping that this is obvious to you why this attribute of manhood is perennially relevant. I think it's rarely or never going to be the case that society doesn't have some need for this type of provisioning to it. And maybe there will be moments where there's material plenty, and that's certainly one of the things today that has impacted our notion of the big man, because we just don't need as many materially today, because we're so materially opulent today that we don't see exactly the need for men to do this as much. But beyond the material, there's so many more things. Again, there's the ideas, there's the creations, there's the new organizations that are needed in all of this, right? And so given that this is so obvious, I mean, the question that comes to me, and again, I even feel a little bit of, what would I say, a little bit of rage, I guess you could say, inside, is that why aren't we teaching this kind of thing in schools to boys? You think about a public school should be a place that prepares a child to be a productive, a good member of society, right? And so this is something that clearly boys and, well, not boys, but men have done throughout society, and it benefits society, right, tremendously. So why are we not teaching boys that this is their duty, this is their role in schools? They could do it starting in schools. In an elementary school, you see how a sixth grader could produce resources. I mean, they could grow food there at the school, produce resources that would then be given to the younger students. But beyond material resources, again, there's things of ideas. They could create things, whether it's artistic creations or other things, and then show them that, okay, now your role is to give these to those that have less. I mean, you could do that right then. And the great thing is that, as we see, men will do this, for an exchange. And all they ask, I mean, it's so funny. All they really even ask is, you see it in It's a Wonderful Life. They just ask for the community to sing them Auld Lang Syne, once in a while, at the end of the movie, right? Da, 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 da. They just ask to give them a little bit of honor, because that's what it's all about for men, right? Status, honor, achievement. And so with very little of that, you can get men producing tremendously for the community. And so what do we do then? What do we do? In our schools, we do the very opposite, of course, and that's what produces the bit of rage to me, right? Instead, we tell boys to quit fidgeting, settle down. We give them the pills to focus, more, and we push them into. I mean, the whole idea of school is to push them into jobs and menial jobs, but the whole framework of school is that we're pushing you in a job to just take care of yourself and kind of your immediate surroundings, so that society doesn't have to. And it's a menial job usually that regular schooling is preparing you for, instead of giving this vision that you boys, yes, take that pent up energy to act, to get doing things. Let's get you doing things, and let's channel that to the good of society. And you'll see that the more you do that, the more society will laud you. And it's this, this incredible, wonderful feedback loop. I think, as usual, other people can put things best. So I've already read this quote once, but I'm going to read it again just because I think it gets down to the heart of it. So this is a quote from page 26 of Jordan Peterson's most recent book. It kind of summarizes this point I'm trying to make perfectly. Those who are power-hungry, tyrannical and cruel, even psychopathic, desire control over others so that every selfish whim of hedonism can be immediately gratified, so that envy can destroy its target, so that resentment can find its expression. But good people are ambitious and diligent, honest, and focus along with it, instead because they are possessed by the desire to solve genuine, serious problems. That variant of ambition needs to be encouraged in every possible manner. It is for this reason, among others, that the increasingly reflexive identification of the striving of boys and men for victory with the patriarchal tyranny that hypothetically characterizes our modern productive and comparatively free societies is so stunningly counterproductive, and it must be said cruel. There is almost nothing worse than treating someone striving for competence as a tyrant in training. And it's really that last sentence that I want to emphasize more than anything. There is almost nothing worse than treating someone striving for competence as a tyrant in training. And of course we felt that as males in the society, that somehow there's something bad tied up with this notion of providing, that ambition to strive and provide resources. Because yes, it very easily can get turned into an ambition for the betterment of oneself. That would kind of be our classical image of the investment banker or something like that. But you just change that just slightly, where it's this ambition for provisioning for society, and you end up with this tremendously powerful force for the benefit of society. And again, guys will do this. That history and all these different cultures are the evidence that guys will do this. And instead, we are taught that the idea of a man being a provider for their families today, of being the provider, for example, instead of the woman or equal with the woman, is outdated and oppressive. You're kind of people will take that notion of providing for your family and treat it almost as if it's something bad, because they're wanting this idea of equality. So in all this, we are getting the world we deserve, right? This world where men are doing this much less. Men are retreating, or I should say males, because of course it's not men in this context. Males are retreating into contexts in which they are solely benefiting themselves. They're doing this kind of striving and conquering, but in video games, where at least there's some feedback and laurels for it, rather out in society which has not encouraged them, and that's the right word, encouragement. The society has not encouraged them in the right ways to do this. And to state it, to me, again, just brings that feeling of rage of how did we miss this? How are we so blind to this today? I think a lot of it has to do because we got to the point of our lives of ease where we just didn't need this as much as far as material sense, but we still need it in so many other senses. Let's end on the question, how should we see this provider role then in the modern dynamic of men and women? Because let's get this crystal clear what I mean when I am going to claim that men should still be the providers today, should still play this role of the big man in their families. Okay? Is that anti-woman? Is that an oppressive idea to woman? Well, let's get some things straight. I fully agree that women can provide also in this way. They can produce resources, they can work jobs, they can lead companies, they can be political leaders, they can do all these things, right? And they should be free to do so. So let me be clear on that. But might I suggest that, especially in this matter of material provisioning, that women have better things to do. And I think that indeed many of them want to be doing rather than just making money or something like that, contributing to making the money for a household. Again, they'll do it if they need to. Many of them are very good at it. But I don't see them being fulfilled in the same way from that providing role, providing the material, things for their family and the basics for their family that you get from men that do this role. There's something, I think, that men, in a sense, feel an innate fulfillment from this type of big man providing that women can do, but maybe don't have the same fulfillment from. And again, women can contradict me if they want. Of course, there's all different types of women, and some would find fulfillment in this. But I try to observe the women around me in my life, and there are many, and try to feel out, is this the kind of thing that they want most? Is this type of honor? Or are there other things that women want? And I think women got roped into this in large measure because our society moved to prizing material accumulation above all. Usually with no explicit expectation of this generosity that we've been talking about. And so soon enough, both women and men were roped into acquiring as much of this monetary wealth and accumulating. Why? In order to consume and spend and get all the nice things that we have. But we roped women into this material provisioning and said, you need to have a career, work this type of job. And I think people have been duped into this. We've been duped into this type of setting, which isn't the most fulfilling setting, right? Again, not that a career can't be fulfilling for a woman, but how about, here's the vision that I want to lay out with this on how men and women can still, how it should be. What's the ideal, okay? So what if women were freed from this expectation, any of this expectation of provisioning in this way that we've talked about, this big man provisioning? So material provisioning, resource provisioning, and in any family, for example, it was the man's duty to make sure that was being taken care of. Well, is that pro-woman or anti-woman? I'd say it's pro-woman, because what does that do? It leaves them the freedom and the space to then do what they feel they should do. Not what they have to do, but they feel what they should do. Okay? So the feminine, as we've talked about before, is this space of possibility. Well, what can women bring out of that space of possibility if they're freed from the expectation of material provisioning like this? And, one thing is children, of course. And I say that first because we have this tendency to kind of diminish that as if it's a demeaning role to produce a child or something. And I want to say right off from the bat, that's absolutely the opposite. We should put that first because there's nothing more incredible in this world than the creation and the taking care of a child. It should be seen as the greater honor than being a CEO in a company. That's a man's way of looking at things. You'd have a greater honor being a CEO of a company than raising a child. I see it the exact opposite way. I see very little honor in being the CEO of a company, and great worth and honor being somebody who creates and takes care of a child. So I put that as the first one. And guess what? Many women, even if they don't want to right now, eventually want to create a child. So this sort of putting the providing role back to the man leaves it so the women can have the children that they want. Because one thing you'll find from a lot of people today, in fact, it's statistically been brought up in news articles lately that people aren't having the children that they would want to have. So let's put that first. But what else would a woman do if she was freed from having to help provide? Well, there's all sorts of things in the community that could be done. Things both small and big. That's where the feminine does so well in the unseen roles, in the private sphere, in the places that I actually think have more influence on the world, in terms of relationships, and behind the scenes helping people that need to be helped, or starting a nonprofit, or whatever they want to do. Again, this is the space of possibility. Women have so much to contribute in scholarship. And what if they were able to engage in scholarship, be scholars, and study the things they want to study, and release scholarship, and it wasn't tied to a need to produce money from it. Okay, there's that. Artistic endeavors, right? Musical endeavors, and if they want to, money. Again, I'm saying women can produce money, right? But how about if the man is taking care of the family's basic resource needs? Well, what could be done with that money? That money could be used to free the family from all material needs by investment or creating the kind of residual income vehicles we've talked about in the video where I explained how I retired. So that could be done, right? When you free women from this duty of having to contribute to the material provisioning of the family, you open up this space of possibility, and women, by and large, tend to do good things in spaces of possibility. That's one of these core things of manhood that we see. Men left to themselves very often tend to get into destructive behaviors. They form in gangs, they get into mischief, they don't do things for other people. Women, it's the exact opposite. The natural tendency is that when you leave them a space of possibility, they find ways to benefit others. All right? And I think the evidence for that is incontrovertible. Of course, there's women out there that are also, women that are lazy and don't do anything, things like that. But by and large, I think there's much more of a natural proclivity for women to benefit others when they are freed up to do so. So that's what I think would naturally happen with this. All right, I'm going to just hit the last point, and then I see some of you have been leaving some stuff in the chat, and we can kind of wrap this up with some Q&A and responding to what's on your mind. So the last thing I wanted to hit with that, and hopefully I've done an adequate job of explaining why I think men assuming back and claiming back this role with pride of being big men and striving for that and providing, why I think that is pro-women in every sense, right? Hopefully I've done a good enough job explaining that and not leaving myself open to anybody that could criticize me for not caring about women in all this. Because as I've explained before, there are more women in my household than males, right? And so it's very much a part of my everyday life that I'm bound up with. Okay, last thing that I want to cover, how do you become a big man, right? And I would say one word on that. It's incrementally. Because I know some of you have explained that you're watching this, maybe you're 19 years old, in your early 20s, and things haven't gone well for you. You are, to put it frankly, maybe you qualify more for these opposite terms, the rubbish men, the garbage men, and you realize that, and you don't want that. What do you do about it? And that's where Jordan Peterson's just little bit of advice of clean your room was so potent, right? That became this meme, because it's exactly right. Wherever you are, you can start with something and start provisioning resources for that thing. Start ordering some little sphere of your life. So, instead of, obviously, Jordan Peterson already hit that to death of cleaning your room. Well, how about paying for your cell phone bill or your internet bill? Any male, no matter where they are, could get a part-time job doing something, flipping burgers or whatever, and pay for something for themselves if they're utterly dependent right now. You could pay for your cell phone bill, for your Netflix, for whatever it is that you're leeching off of others. And so you build out of that incremental sphere by, taking care of more of the things of yourself, severing that dependence wherever you're at, little by little, and seeing the pride and the honor that will naturally come. I mean, if you're leeching off of your parents or living off someone else, my guess is they will honor you the minute that they see you taking these efforts to get off of that kind of dependence. So you go from there, and then you try to get to the point where you not only have resources to take care of yourself, but you have resources, ample resources to take care of other people. And that also should be possible, working the kind of full-time jobs that most people could get. Imagine you don't have just some blatant disability or something like that. And so at that point, even if you're not married, if you don't have children, you could start to play this big man role, right? You could do it for nieces and nephews if you have those. You could do it, there's many ways in your community that you could start benefiting those who around you who need more resources. And so you could start to do that, and again, start feeling the fulfillment and the honor that comes from people that do that. And then of course you grow from there. If you can provide for yourself and another person, it makes you, this is tied in to sexuality, it makes you so much more attractive to the opposite sex. I mean, I think today so many women are willing to settle for, if they can just get a guy in decent health with a decent job, you can find a very attractive, very nice and smart, intelligent, capable woman, because there's so few men out there today that even with just some basic ability to be a big man, you could find an incredible wife, is my claim, right? So that you don't have to become the uber big mans like I've been explaining today to get to that point where you can have a wife and children, right? And then you go from there, you start taking care of children, you start taking care of your community. One way I was able to do this, for example, in a part of my life, just to give a small example, is that I reached the point, where I was taking care of my family, I had time, and so I started giving my time and resources to something as simple as soccer. And then pretty soon I was giving more time and resources to soccer than I was even my own job. But it ended up, I think producing value in the community, and it produced tremendous value for myself. I was the head coach of a high school soccer team. I took my salary, which I didn't need, that they were paying me, and took all that money and pumped it back into the team. So we were able to do lavish dinners, and I was able to give all these incentives that, if we progressed in our goals and things, we could, I take out the team to the buffet and all those things. So you can see it's tied into this notion of providing feasts and ceremonies and things like that for others. So there's so many ways there's limitless, endless ways that you can do this in the world. And in the end, you should just be asking yourself, like, what else really is wealth for? We've been so deceived by this as a society. Is it really about getting a bigger square footage house? Like, do you really think that would provide fulfillment? To get the McMansion, to have the BMW, to have 3 houses, to have the private jet or the private helicopter, and be able to travel to these places and experience all sort of luxuries and pleasures. I mean, to even state it should be so glaringly obvious that there is so great a hollowness there, but that's what we've been fed for so long. And that instead, this acquisition of wealth, what is it for? It's for other people. It's for giving it away. There's something so much more inherently beautiful about that, and so much more inherently fulfilling. And the end of It's a Wonderful Life, if you haven't seen it in a while, just hits that home to a T. So I leave that image with you of George Bailey at the end of that movie. And that's all I have to say about that today. All right, I'm going to jump in here, see what you guys have on the comment front. Martin Kuchen says, I would say George Bailey always did what was right in the moment. Yeah, there's something very true to that. Usually what's right is what benefits everyone the most in the long run, but that's the tough thing, is for some reason the universe is structured such that doing the right thing is oftentimes hurtful in the moment but beneficial in the long run. And that's where that whole notion of sacrifice is an idea that I think humans have been working on for millennia now, but was so key to our progress. This notion of realizing that what's right to do, what will work the best, tying it into yesterday's discussion about pragmatism, is oftentimes to do things that hurt us in the moment or are unpleasant or difficult in the moment, but will be much better in the long run. It's been curious to think, why is the universe structured like that? There's a question I'd like your insight on. No S. I like this mindset, but it's kind of utopian as humans aren't perfect, and such thinking will pretty much make an honorable person break due to corruption. Some would argue that the idea of, so, there's something to that. There's something utopian about this, but that's again where I get to this. The manhood is an exchange. Let's be very clear about this, that men aren't just doing this to do it, right? There has to be the other thing about it. There has to be the crowd singing George Bailey, saying, George Bailey, you are the most honorable guy in town at the end of the movie, or else it doesn't work. So that is the return, the exchange that men demand is the honor, right? Is the status. And to put it frankly, leading into our next episode, it's the sex, right? These men that do this are the ones that will get more sex, okay? Let's just put it frankly like that. Most men like sex, therefore, there's a reward for doing this. So that's what I would say to this, is that this almost, I'm not going to say almost, every good human endeavor is always an exchange. It's not just good for one party, it's good for everybody, and that's why it works, right? That's what I think morality is, in a sense, is the things that humanity has found that work out good for everybody in the long run. So it's not about hurting yourself to benefit others. It's about benefiting everybody simultaneously. So that's why I think this can and does work and has worked in many societies throughout history. All right, some would argue, Noah says also, some would argue that the idea of schooling started to make the crowd more obedient and later to make them only function inside of the system. This may be out of topic. Oh, for sure. That's definitely the case. It does have to do with this because you start realizing what the system was in this case. And again, it was a system that came, the god of society came to be material accumulation for personal. It all funnels down to profits, right? Why did we want people to be able to get decent jobs to make money for themselves? So that they could accumulate, so that they could buy things, so so that they could have the pleasures of life. Why? Who benefits on that, right? The corporations, the businesses, people that have bottom lines that they're searching for. They need people to have money, so people need jobs and things like that, so that they can be sold things. And that's been our system, folks, in a lot of ways. Of course, it's not so exactly caricatured as that, but in a large measures that has been our God, our system, the thing that we've been worshiping for so long in society, and it's what's falling apart right now. I mean, it has been for some time. Okay, he says, I remember Jordan Peterson saying men care about things, women care about people. Yeah, that's right. There's some truth to that, and again, women naturally will do more good for society without these institutions like manhood having to kind of channel them into that. So yes. Martin Kuchen. Fulton Sheen said Satan's last battle will be versus the family. There's a lot of truth to that too. A family, if you see what is the fundamental unit of society, American society has pushed it to the individual, you could say. Well, if you see it as the family, that's the fundamental unit of the society, then if you can destroy all other institutions, if you destroy the family and it is the fundamental unit, then you destroy everything. I tend to see it, if you know me, I'm an and person. So I think the individual is a fundamental unit of society. So is the family. So is the community. They're all fundamental units of society. So they're all key, but yeah, you destroy any one of those and there's bound to be trouble. Christian says, once the norm is a double income household, it's hard to go against the grain, though I'm fortunate enough to be able to do that for now. Yeah, again, the world that we've lived in our expectations have funneled us into this world of the double income expectation. Because to a lot of people, they say, like, what are you talking about, Gary? We have to do this. There's no other way than to have, both spouses working. But I would say, look at it again, because that all has to do with what expectations you have of life. Yeah, when you expect the latest iPhone and the shiny car and the kids to go to the private school, and then you expect you're going to pay for your whole kid's education, which is a thing I would not recommend at all. I completely paid for mine, and I have told my kids they're on their own, but I'll help them to pay for their own. Anyway, when you get into the double income thing and you see why people feel like that's necessary, then yeah, it makes sense. But if you can pull back and say, well, what actually do we need out of life, and you realize that actually we could get by with a lot less, then that fades away, that expectation of the double income. And yes, for those that are going to tell me, some people have no other choice. There's a lot of people that are at the very bottom rungs of society, and they literally can't eat if they don't have both spouses working. And yeah, I completely agree. There are those situations. There's some people that are starting down there at the very bottom, and it is sometimes the case that both have to work just to put food on the table. And I'm sympathetic to that, of course. But again, I think that broader culturally wise, there's a way for so many women to avoid having to work that if we had a different value structure. Christian also says, what was so great about It's a Wonderful Life, it can show you that the success of others can be your success. It isn't a zero-sum game. Exactly. Yep, that we are social creatures. We're bound up where like I was trying to say there at the end, this is always an exchange in society. Everything's always an exchange. The universe is such, I believe this, that everybody can benefit simultaneously. There are paths in which that's the case. And they're very narrow paths, right? That's why you get these notions of the narrow way to the good. But they're there. And our ancestors have devoted years and labor and ideas into trying to preserve those paths because they weren't easily discovered, right? But when you find them, those are clearly the best ways. And I think that's one of the things I have faith in, you could say, is that there's always a path in any situation that simultaneously benefits everybody. That equilibrated state that we've been talking about, where there's a way for everything to be good for you, for others, simultaneously across time. But like we've been talking about, for some reason the universe is structured such that it oftentimes requires some sort of inconvenience or hurt or in the short term. It's almost to be expected that that's the case as well. A tangent, Gary, but what position do you play in soccer? Okay, yeah, good question. I've played a couple, but the two ones that I predominantly played was a kind of sweeper back position, so a central defensive position. I was pretty good under pressure and in that kind of coordinating role and protective role there in the back. So I did that and could do it very well. But I also played a pretty good, when I was playing here in the United States, almost every formation was kind of a 4-4-2 formation. So I was playing more of the right midfielder position, where I was expected to get up there into the attack, but simultaneously sprint back to be there in defense as well. And so that was a role that I was playing. So yes, I was a center back. Oftentimes there's different formations going on at the time, but that was definitely one that I could default into very good. I was never that great as a striker. I had some decent speed and things, but just was never good from that position. It always was so much more comfortable for me from more of a midfielder, but I also wasn't a central midfielder either in that kind of distributive role. So if that tells you anything about personality or things like that, I definitely had to, in the midfielder role, part of what worked about it for me was it was a position that required me to bust my butt and do the sprinting up and down the field, which, I had okay skill, but not tremendous skill. So putting in that athleticism and that kind of grit into it produced some good results for me. Okay, I think we've exhausted everybody's comments and questions for today. I hope this one was valuable to you, because again, I think it's so relevant to today. This is one of those that I look forward to making. What I'm planning on doing with a lot of this material is that, again, it's forced me to get it down, get it in a structured format, that now would be so easy to kind of make a video. You could see how bringing in these examples, these movie examples that I did today, I could pull these ideas together into like a 15, 20-minute package that with video clips and music and a tight script that I think would spread a lot on YouTube today. So that is something that I'm really benefiting out of this. And so next time, which I'm hoping will be tomorrow, I think we could get my thoughts together, but we're going to be talking about the procreative role, about manhood. We're going to be talking about sex, about children, and who doesn't like to talk about those things. And once again, I think you'll enjoy the discussion, because I think we can turn these societal narratives where these men's notions of sex being about or manhood being tied to kind of an anti-woman definition, or not a domination, but a using of women in terms of sex, and see that once again, if you look back at societies, it's the exact opposite in the way that the sexual expectations on men were overwhelmingly pro-women. So you might enjoy that. Okay, we'll see everybody tomorrow. Take care.